Chapter 19 of Bill the Conqueror by P.G. Wodehouse. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Bill trespasses. The garden of Holly House slumbered in the moonlight. Trees threw dark shadows across the lawn, and in the bushes little breezes went whispering to and fro. To any man strolling there with his mind at rest, the place would have seemed a magic haven of peace. But on Bill, lurking warily in the shelter of the shrubbery, its romantic appeal was wasted. His mind was far from being at rest. It was with no vague intention of hanging about in the darkness and keeping a sentimental watch on lighted windows that Bill had come to the garden this time. He was here tonight as the man of action. Hours of concentrated brooding over Flick's letter had brought him to the conclusion that it was an inspired letter, probably dictated word for word, with all the commas and full stops complete, by that repellent woman who had forced them asunder in Waterloo Station. Yes, the more Bill thought about it, the more definitely he seemed to see in that letter the hand of the demon aunt. No man of action embarks on any enterprise without a settled plan. Bill had a settled plan. It involved the cooperation of one of the minor domestics of the Hammond household, and it was in quest of such a domestic that he had taken up his present position in the middle of a laurel bush facing the side of the house. He had reasoned the thing out. It would be useless to attempt to communicate with Flick through the ordinary medium of the post. A woman like that Waterloo Station woman, brimming over, as that brief glimpse of her had told him, with the lowest and most criminal cunning, would undoubtedly be exercising supervision over Flick's correspondence. She would be watching for the postman like a bird dog, all ready to intercept letters. As for district messenger boys, it would be a sheer waste of money to employ them. No, the only thing to do was to lurk about here until one of the servants came out for a breath of air, and then collar him or her, and bribe her or him with untold gold, to convey secretly to Flick the note which even now was burning holes in his left breast pocket. It was a good letter. The writing of it had occupied an hour and a half, but the results had justified the toil. In 6 closely filled sheets it told all that there was to tell about his undying love, explained the roseate aspect of the situation as regarded the future, when Uncle Cooley should have been informed of the Slingsby matter, and sketched out in detail a scheme for Flick to leave home privily next day, meet him under the clock at Charing Cross, and proceed with him to the registry office, where he had made all arrangements for their immediate marriage. In the whole annals of love correspondence there had probably never been a letter which so nicely combined the fervent and the practical, and all that was needed now was a messenger to take it to her. But the charms of the moonlit garden, obvious though they should have been, appeared to have no appeal for the domestic staff of Holly House. The breezes chuckled in the bushes, the moonbeams danced on the lawn, invisible flowers filled the air with a languorous scent. But not even a knife-and-boot boy was lured out of that back door. Little by little, as he kept shifting his position to avoid cramp, Bill began to be filled with sneering and contemptuous thoughts towards the British domestic. He seemed to picture these degraded creatures huddled together on this divine night, in a stuffy kitchen, with all the windows shut and the fire going full blast, talking about the movies, or reading forget-me-not novelettes. And finally, after a distant clock had twice struck the hour, the strain of this waiting became too much for him. He burst from the bushes and marched up to the front door. A long interval followed his ringing of the bell. Then a parlour-maid appeared. Bill, who had anticipated a butler and had been wondering if the latter would remember having seen him before, experienced a momentary relief, and had even got so far as feeling that here was the minor domestic for whom he had been waiting all these weary hours, when he caught sight of the girl's face, and immediately withdrew the fingers that were fumbling in his pocket for the note. She wore spectacles, and through these her eyes seemed to glitter with so austere a light that he suspected her instantly of being a minion, probably the demon aunt's right-hand woman. Nevertheless, it being necessary to render some explanation of his presence, he plunged boldly ahead. "I want to see Miss Sheridan," he said. The spectacles raked him with what seemed a shocked incredulity. The parlour-maid had the air of one who has been reading books of etiquette, and is cognizant of the fact that calls upon young ladies at such an hour of the night are among the things that are not done. She made Bill feel like the villain of a "What is wrong with this picture?" advertisement. "Miss Sheridan is not at home, sir," she replied in a voice of ice. "Can I see Mr. Paradine?" "Mr. Paradine is not at home, sir." She eyed Bill with critical spectacles, and went through the first stages of closing the door. Nor can we in justice blame her. Bill's vigil in the bushes had left him a good deal dishevelled, and far from the sort of person one likes to find on one's front doorstep after dark. "They've all gone to the theatre." This was true. It had occurred to the amiable Mr. Hammond that Flick was looking pensive and depressed, and he had continued his good ministrations on her behalf by suggesting a dinner in town and a visit to the theatre. And it was part of the irony which so marks mundane affairs that the manager enriched by the expedition was Mr. Wilfrid Slingsby, for it was at the Bijou Theatre that they had taken a box. To Bill, however, there seemed no truth whatever in the statement. Its obvious falsity confirmed him in his opinion that this woman was a mere instrument of Flick's Aunt Frances. He withdrew sullenly as the door closed, and after pausing for several moments in deep thought on the drive, sneaked around the corner of the house and hid himself once more in the bushes. There was no need to be discouraged by a single parlour-maid. A big house like this would have all sorts of servants, and at any moment one of a more benevolent disposition might pop out. He snuggled into his laurel bush and waited. He had been waiting some 10 minutes when there suddenly came to him something that was practically an inspiration. On the night when he had taken refuge on top of that outhouse roof, Flick, he now recollected, had come climbing down her knotted sheet from a window immediately above it, presumably that of her bedroom. Silly of him not to think of that before. All he had to do was to locate that outhouse, climb onto its roof, and there he would be. If there was a light in the window, he could whistle softly till she appeared. And if the darkness showed that she was not there, he could put the letter with a good-sized stone in his handkerchief and hurl the whole package in for her to find when she went to bed. He wasted no more time. Extricating himself from the bush, he made his way round the house. There was his roof, just as he had left it. So far, good. But the window above it was dark. He groped about for a stone, found one, and was wrapping up his parcel, when from somewhere above his head there came the sound of a window opening, followed by a soft but penetrating "Hey!" A man who has been subjected to the amount of nervous strain which Bill had had to undergo that day is in no mood to have "Hey!" said to him out of upper windows when he is trespassing in hostile gardens. Bill bit his tongue, dropped the stone and the note, and leaped sideways into the shadow of the outhouse. There he waited, holding his breath, for the drama to develop. It now became apparent that only his guilty conscience had led him to suppose that he was the person whom the mysterious voice had addressed, for at this moment there sounded from the darkness to his left a sharp whistle, and he perceived that he was not the only trespasser in this garden. The breeze, which for some time had been freshening, now began to blow strongly, shredding away the bank of clouds which had covered the moon, and illuminating the scene as if a spotlight had been turned on. He himself was in the shadow of the outhouse, but beyond this little pool of gloom the garden was bright, and he saw all things clearly. Out of the window, easily recognizable in the silver glow, protruded the head and shoulders of his uncle's adopted son Horace, while below, his large feet ruthlessly trampling some choice begonias, stood a squat, burly figure, the figure of a man whom Bill did not know, and with whom, if he had had his choice, he would have been loath ever to become acquainted. For, as plainly as if he had carried a sign, this man wore the word "Plug Ugly" written all over him. We, who have met Joe the Dip at close quarters in the light of the sun, know that he was not one of nature's beauty prize winners. Seen at night, he was a human gargoyle. The boy Horace was leaning farther out of the window. "I've got 'em," he said. The wind was now blowing so strongly as to render whispering impossible, and Horace's chest notes came plainly to Bill's ears, as did the Plug Ugly's response. "Good enough," said the Plug Ugly. "Drop 'em down." For the first time, on hearing these words, Bill, though still at a loss to know what all this was about, became convinced that dark deeds were in progress. Possibly the interview with Mr. Slingsby had blunted his genial trust in human honesty. At any rate, he needed no further words to tell him that sinister things were toward, and this was fortunate, for there were no further words. Horace reached back into the room, leaned forward again, balancing in his hands some solid object that looked like a bag, and dropped this into the depths, where it was neatly caught by the Plug Ugly. The boy then retired and closed the window, and the Plug Ugly, hereinafter to be called Joe the Dip, trampled down a few more begonias and began to steal down the path that led past Bill's hiding-place. He had arrived abreast of him when the latter spoke. "Stop," said Bill. "What have you got there?" In the normal round of his everyday life, Joe the Dip was a man of phlegmatic habit. It took a good deal to stir him to any exhibition of mental distress more marked than the quiver of a raised eyebrow. But this was something special. It got right into his emotions and churned them up. With a single startled yelp of dismay, he looked once over his shoulder and then began to pound off across the lawn as fast as his ample feet would take him. It was a futile move. Even under ordinary conditions, Bill could have given him 50 yards in 100 and won comfortably. And now the welcome prospect of action, coming after his long tedious wait in the bushes, made him a super sprinter. Joe, moreover, was hampered by a heavy bag. The race ended halfway across the lawn, where Joe, feeling the hot breath of the pursuer on his neck, turned at bay. He dropped the bag and flung himself on Bill. Nothing could have been more admirably suited to the latter's frame of mind. Joe, standing beneath the window in the moonlight, had looked an ugly customer, but that did not damp his ardor. Bill had had a trying day, and what he felt at that moment was that they could not come too ugly for him. At the precise moment when Joe's clutching fingers closed upon his throat, he induced him to relax them with a short, sharp uppercut, which, from the click which followed its delivery, appeared to have landed squarely on the spot where it was calculated to do most good. There ensued a scrambling flurry of blows at close quarters, and then Joe, securing a grip, swung Bill off his feet, and they fell together. and for some moments matters became confused, with Joe in the ascendant. But every fighter has his weak spot. With some it is a too fragile jaw, while others have a finicky distaste for being hit on the nose. Achilles, it will be remembered, could stand little punishment on the heel. None of these weaknesses impaired the efficiency as a fighting machine of Joe the Dip. Strong men with hammers could hit him on the nose and accomplish nothing, nor was it easy to discourage him by buffets on the jawbone. Nevertheless, he was but human. He had his danger spot, and it was one which had frequently undone him in the rough and tumbles of his colorful past. He was extraordinarily ticklish. You had but to prod Joe with a sharp finger, and he became a spent force. And this was what Bill did now, purely by chance, as he strove to overcome him in the wrestle. His wandering fingers suddenly roamed searchingly over his adversary's ribs, and on the instant Joe wrenched himself free with a stifled howl and staggered to his feet. Bill also rose. There was nothing in his acquaintance with Joe that led him to suppose that it was safe to remain on the ground while the latter was standing. He jumped up, and from that instant the tide of battle began to turn. Joe was a massive rather than a nimble fighter. When it came to long-range exchanges, he was at a disadvantage. The wind had dropped now as suddenly as it had risen, and clouds once more covered the moon, but there still remained enough light for Bill's purposes. He slid in and jabbed Joe in the eye. He swung forcefully and felt Joe's cauliflower ear yield squashily under his fist. He slid in once more and smote Joe on the other eye, and it was this last blow, delivered with all the violence of one who had had a morning with Wilfred Slingsby, an afternoon with Flick's letter, and a night in the bushes of Holly House, that decided the issue. It seemed to lend the final touch to Joe's discouragement. Staggering back, he prolonged his stagger till it became a run. Then, making for the shrubbery, he cast himself into it, and working his way round till he came out into the open, took to his heels and passed out of Bill's life forever. Bill stood panting. This little turn-up had done him a world of good. He felt happy and invigorated. Dismissing his late opponent from the scheme of things, he picked up the bag and went back to the outhouse to find the letter he had dropped, and it was here that he received the final shock of this disturbing day. The letter was not there, nor was his handkerchief. Both had been swept away into the darkness by that unfriendly wind. Bill searched well and thoroughly, but he could not search the whole garden, and gradually there stole upon him a sense of discouragement, as poignant as that which he had caused Joe the Dip to feel in the concluding stages of their little disagreement. He was beaten. Fate was against him, and there was no use struggling. He slouched brokenly through the garden, out into the road, slouched half a mile down the road till he met a taxicab, and climbing wearily in, drove back to Marmont Mansions, where Judson greeted him with frank amazement. "What on earth," Judson exclaimed, "have you been doing to your face, Bill, old man?" Bill had not been conscious of anything amiss with his face. A glance at the mirror now revealed surprising wounds. Judging from the evidence, at least one of Joe's wandering wallops must have got home on his nose. He placed the bag on the table and went off to the bathroom. When he returned, cleansed and refreshed, he found that Judson's simple curiosity had led him to open the bag. "What are you doing with all these old books, Bill?" "Books?" Bill began to understand. He told his story briefly. "That kid must be one of a gang of crooks," he said. "He certainly dropped that bag out of window to the fellow I had the scrap with." Joyous excitement lit up Judson's speaking countenance. "Why, good gosh, Bill, old man," he cried, "this is the most amazing bit of luck that ever happened. Old Paradine can't, in common decency, do less than slip you half his fortune now. He's a nut about books. Many a time has my old father bored me stiff with stories about his library. If ever there was a blue-eyed boy, you will be it, once he hears about this. Make your terms stiff, Bill, old man. Slip it into his ribs. Don't weaken. He ought to give you $500,000 a year for this." "And a lot of good that will be," grunted Bill moodily. "Flick's marrying Roderick Pike the day after tomorrow." "What? But I thought she was going to marry you." "Well, she isn't. They've been getting at her, I suppose. I had a letter from her. That's why I went to Holly House. I thought I might be able to see her, or at any rate get word to her." Judson's jaw had fallen. This calamity was affecting him deeply. "Flick!" he cried. "Marry that bird who said Toddy Van Ryter found the silks? Not while I have my strength." "What are you going to do about it?" said Bill wearily. "Do about it? Do about it?" boomed Judson. "Do about it? Why—" He paused reflectively. "Well, I'm darned if I know." Chapter 19